All right. Hi, everybody. I'm Peter Chanthanacone, and thanks, Uni, for giving me a chance to talk to you about planning and directing for animation. It's meant to be kind of informal in terms of how to process some of these ideas and how to produce them. And I'll talk about my films and how I went about doing all of that. But first off, just a little bit about myself quickly. So here's the thought threads that we're going to have in the next 20 minutes or so. And so here's who I am, and I think this is really important whenever you're planning and directing for anything, whatever you're producing, so to speak. Your content should reflect who you are. So this is what I am. Vietnamese parents, born in Thailand, grew up in Laos, ended up at refugee camp, moved to Canada. I was educated in the U.S. as well. Then now I live in Dubai in the United Arab Emirates. So just in case you're curious where that is, it's kind of in the middle of both Europe and Asia. And growing up, this is what kind of an image from Niagara Falls. I was just living outside that, and illustration was really one of my main methods of communicating visually. Fast forward a little bit, I ended up doing some graphic design work because computers were quite slow at that time. And I got into a lot of photography, especially travel photography. So here's some images of my travels over the years. And at the time of this recording, I've been to 79 countries. I got, I think, another 21 to go. As you can see, I really love landscapes, mountains, and water. That tends to be my level of attraction. Also, through photography, though, we can tell stories. So here's just a couple of images, some street photography that I was doing in different places. I believe this was in Colombia, and this is in Thailand. I also take students around, and this is really important too, to be inspired and to see what the current trends are in industry. So here is Pixar on the left in Emeryville, California, and then Shinjuku, Square Enix, or is it Shibuya, on the right. Whenever we're creating content, I think this is also really great. We have opportunity to disseminate our ideas and concepts, and I think this helps fuel new ideas in terms of planning and talking to people and seeing how they solve similar problems. And so here's a snapshot of different conference presentations I've had over the years. And as I mentioned before, it's really critical, as I'm telling you these tips, that you also tap into the industry. And this is a photo of Rift Studio in Bangkok, Thailand. So that's me on the right-hand side. Talking about the films, here's a list of how many hours the films take. So you can see that earlier on, Winston Shuttle, which I won't be playing, took somewhere between 1,300 hours. And over time, after many mistakes, the production time has steadily dropped to somewhere between 500 to 1,000 hours. So this has been very beneficial, but as you can tell, this process of creating animation has not gone that much faster. Now we do have some tools available to us that have and can make it quicker, especially with AI, but for the most part, it still does take a lot of time to animate. Software that I use, pretty straightforward industry software, and here's a list of the films that I've produced over the years as a film maker, director, and university professor. In terms of the ideas, the Winston Shuttle, which again I won't be playing, is really based on a contemporary version of Noah's Ark. So I have a robot cyborg as Noah on the left here, and if you're familiar with the story, it's all these animals that need to get onto this boat that in order to survive, because of the mass flooding is about to occur. So I just reshaped it. Instead, we have a cyber robot collecting DNA information from the wildlife, and instead of a rainstorm, it's a meteorite storm, and instead of a boat, it is a spaceship. Next story was Death to Different, and talk about the process with this. I had a team of students helping me with this. And like in any case, right, students are going to be a little bit different from professionals in the fact that they're still learning and evolving and so we really need to massage that relationship. And there's a really fun picture of our team. The story was written by David Hayes. I adapted it a little bit. I added a different ending, a twist to that ending. And again, the short story was given to me because he was teaching short story writing at the university, and so I just was able to tap in onto his skill set. From there, though, I was working with the students to help design with the characters, and a lot of the design, because the students were actually based in Polytechnic Studies, engineering students, they didn't have a drawing background. So this is one thing that is really critical. In terms of the speed, it took a very long time to produce the character, because a lot of the iterations would take hours versus a drawing, which would take seconds. So it's really important that you do most of the work in drawing format before trying to produce in 3D. So this particular student, Chris, was developing the design of the character in 3D when really we should have been drawing out the character first before going straight to 3D. So it's very, very time consuming in that sense. And so you see the different iterations of that process in terms of the design. Moving forward, here's Junkbox from 2012. This was from just a visit to a rural part of Laos, and I have to show this example of how ingenious it is that this light, which turns on at night, attracts bugs, and those bugs eventually fall into the water, which becomes food for the fish. So I thought this was a really brilliant idea in terms of sustainability. And after looking at the houses, I was really inspired, which then in turn became the design of the main character's home, which in part was from a conversation I had with a friend, my high school friend. We were talking about a short film idea, which of course it was a little bit more abstract than I wanted, and because of that, the story had to change quite a bit. So let me just play a short little 10-second clip from it. And because of that, the production time of this was very, 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 very long. As you saw in the graph previously, it ended up taking 3 years, almost 2,500 hours, because a lot of the assets were created, but a lot of the animation had to be redone because the story just didn't make sense. So it was one of those issues where you can try to create something that's abstract and maybe conceptual, an idea, but typically an audience may want to see something that is more fully fleshed out in terms of a narrative and storytelling with character development. And so that was one of the major problems with that. So again, that was an issue also of lack of storyboards. There were no storyboards produced in that project. So I was testing out how to remove the pre-production process to a short film production when in fact it's really difficult to do that. And I'll talk a little bit more about that later in terms of how there are ways to go around it. The next film is Touch Free, and a lot of the designs here for this story came from Hiroshi Yoshi. So I was able to contact him, and he replied, and he generously sent me about 8 models. I had my students, again, the students were with me for 1 or 2 years now, so they've gotten a little bit more seasoned. They got better, and they also were attending grad school with me, so I've had them for about 2 or 3 years. As you can see, the quality of the work is still not quite there, so that's why I had the students look at inspiration and here's some other ideas that they came up with. A lot of these character designs are based on ideas of things that I enjoy, and that's how we came about with them. I love pizza, and again, a lot of inspiration came from Japan, where you have a primitive shape and then an object that, let's say, a store is trying to sell on top of their head, and so it's just a little bit poking fun at that design process. The project itself, when I was planning it, It started off with storyboards, and with those storyboards, I was able to lock in the film. Once I was able to lock the film in, and after I had a lot of feedback from different people, I was pretty satisfied with the outcome of the visual look of it. There were a couple of shots that I needed to change here and there, but for the most part, it stayed true to the storyboards. So there you go. I mean, in terms of the music and sound effects, I had a colleague. I outsourced it. I had a colleague who uh, is a musical producer, and he came up with that. But going back to storyboards, Perfect Lover is a great example where I used small paper instead of drawing on a small storyboard template. And so I put these on the wall. I probably spent more time putting the tape on the paper than the actual drawings themselves. And so you can see how I was planning all the shots. There are no shot numbers, and there's another thing. It wasn't until later that I would put the shot numbers in because I could move the shots around on the piece of paper and move them around. It's a lot easier than trying to move them around in Photoshop, for example, or having to redraw, point arrows around, copy paste and stuff like that. This is a lot easier and faster to create iterations of your film, checking the editing in terms of whether you want to have a linear storyline or a non-linear story. It's very easy to be able to just move individual drawings on a wall. It's also a great way to discuss your ideas with people who happen to be dropping in, whether it's your students or your peer group. You can quickly pitch the idea to them and say, hey, what do you think about this? So I really recommend doing this technique. And again, it's taking A4 paper, cutting it four ways, and then drawing on top of it with a marker. And as you can see, these sketches are very loose, and they end up being in the film. So let me pull that up. Here's a snippet from the film. Found out later that there was a student group. I think they were based in India. They more or less copied my idea shot to shot, and made their own Perfect Lover for, I believe, their thesis project. So that was pretty funny. Moving on to Parking Gods. Again, this was planning and producing. This was again in part of a funny situation where you go to a parking lot. In this case, for example, Walmart, and this parking lot's pretty empty. You go there on the busiest time, and you can't find a parking spot. And also, a good friend of mine would always thank the parking god if he was able to get a close parking spot, as he would always like to drive around the parking lot for some time to find a spot. But in terms of the design, this is all done again embracing new technology this time, and it was using tablets. So iPad. I was on a plane, so I just drew these quick sketches and sent them to one of my students who was doing independent study with me, just to get some ideas. And this is her version on the left, and this is the last version on the right, just to simplify the character designs to make it straightforward and simple in that sense. Each student, of course, or it depends who you're working with, is really going to have certain skill sets, and you want to take advantage of those skill sets. So this particular student was good with illustration. In the film, there was another student that was doing an independent study with me, and she just couldn't understand the way After Effects worked to animate. I had just had maybe too many layers, and so she proposed to me that why don't I make the soundtrack? And I was really hesitant at first, but it ended up being the soundtrack in the film. So here's the soundtrack right now. So I didn't no idea that she had any sort of musical background, and she was able to produce this, and it turned out to, like, again, work perfectly. So there's some screen direction issues with this, and yeah, I didn't pick it up immediately when I was doing the storyboards and the animatic. And that's another thing to definitely consider. Watch it over and over again. Have other people watch it and have them question you. Make sure that you're getting people that are visual storytellers, ideally, so they can again assess properly. Because typically the normal person just wouldn't know what to say or be able to communicate like what exactly was wrong about a shot or the film itself. In terms of again planning, again I was on a trip. I was in Turin, Italy, at a conference, and this particular photo, I mean, I've been to Europe many times, but this particular photo and the shape of the car really ended up being the inspiration for the designs of the cars and the look of the film. And again, just making it more playful, elongating it, and at the same time, I was really not so interested in rendering high quality images. So I made all the geometry very basic. And you notice too that the characters are 2D, and this was in part because I was teaching some 2D courses, and I thought, oh, why don't I try to incorporate some 2D from my lectures into my pipeline, just to see some of the potential issues that students could face when they're producing their 2D animations in Adobe Animate or Adobe After Effects. And again, here's a car that a student built on the left here, and then what I end up just doing with the right, just taking a car that was online for free and then shaping it to match the world that I was trying to produce. So again, a lot of planning comes from your everyday life, and if you're constantly in the same place, it's going to be a little bit more difficult to be inspired. So it is really important that you do try to get out there as much as you can. Take photographs, images of things you find interesting. I was running around the block at this time when I was visiting my sister, so this type of color palette ended up being in the film, and I don't remember seeing a fire hydrant of this colors before. So it was, even though I've been to Canada, I lived in Canada for a good chunk of my life, it still caught my attention, and I made sure I took a photograph of it. Working with the students again, and depending on who you're working with, this particular student, Jared, excellent illustrator, had a particular look to his work, so you were able to embrace that look because he's the illustrator on the project, and he was also an animator on it. And so you can see from these sketches that how it ended up becoming the characters for the film. I gave him some direction in terms of the police officers, for example, one being round, one being rectangular, and then just having faith in the whole process that I knew he was more than capable of producing. And again, the storyboards were put together using a tablet, and this was after I had written out the story. So again, when you're planning, you write about 10 different story ideas. You figure which one of those 10 would be best as animation in terms of the medium, and then from there, taking the words and trying to visualize those words and tell the story without having the characters talk too much, because it is for animation, or any text on the screen. So you do see a lot of text on screens for movies, but for short film format, it's rare that you will see text on a screen, because the intention of animation isn't for people to read it, but for people to watch it. So everything is happening on the screen as movement rather than as text or verbally. So as you see, again, the use of 3D, 2D, I'm going back and forth at this point, and it does create a pretty interesting visual aesthetic, which I think now we find to be very common. Here's that shot in the intro, and here is what it looks like in 3D. So you see the road being attached, you see spotlights, and you see the matte painting. In terms of the software, you can see that the number of layers is pretty vast. And you can see too, based on the blurry image, that the composition, each shot is in one After Effects file. So there can be a lot of corruption in this sense, which is why I actually end up having only one composition per shot. So one file, one After Effects file per shot, which does take a little bit of time when you're loading and unloading, but After Effects does get corrupt and you don't want to lose your entire project. Another thing about planning that, I do put all my images on the cloud, all my projects files in the cloud, so if there is any sort of corruption, I can always go back and iterate, and the history goes to about 1 month. So ideally, you're working on this project every day, so you're able to pick up any sort of corrupt files before Dropbox just removes those revisions. So that's been really, really, really useful. I would not store all the files locally. I put them up on the cloud, so that way, again, those iterations, every time you save it, you have a history of those files, and it prevents you from having to redo shots. I think there's only one time where a particular project where I had a shot that was corrupt and I had to rebuild it, and it was very painful. Even though the shot is like 3 or 4 seconds, it's supposed to be recreated, layout, get the animation, all the keyframes in place, and then have to re-render in light after you've done all that. So I would highly recommend make sure you put it on the cloud. This is the next series of films called the Dance Series. Again, something that I really enjoy doing is both music and dance. And at this point too, I had another group of students from a different university, University of Iowa, that were helping me. So Z and Petter worked on me on this project, and this was really more about the curiosity of motion capture. So taking, again, my love for music and dance and my access to technology to come up with the next project. So here's ZDEP data between 2 Kinect cameras, and here's the dancer. She's performing, and I made sure that the movements were pretty wide and open, only because of the technology not being able to capture all of the joint information because it's only running on 2 cameras. So again, she was really, Crystal was really great on putting together a hip hop sequence that we were able to use, taking that mocap data and then producing something like this, which is a test. When I was in Dubai for a conference many years ago. And you can see the test in terms of the background, also the test of the proportions of the character. So this is not Crystal, but another dancer, breakdancing in particular, and how it kind of works. So this test was a good example in terms of what works and what doesn't work. And you can see with the background, which I think nowadays we are more familiar with, something called photogrammetry, where we take a series of images of an object and it will generate a 3D version of it. And so usually about 12 images is what it needs, and then you can create like this. Here's an alleyway, and then here's a museum. I was testing large objects, large rooms, for example, and that's how that became. Of the sign, more of experimental projects, which we end up becoming music videos. Let's see if I can play dance. Here's Dance World. It's just dancing, and there was no story. You can think of some ways too of there is some stories being told in terms of these avatars and the placement of them, the types of avatars, the types of dancing, and also the kind of music that's playing. Now that the market is like super saturated, I believe now, thinking back, this is almost 8 years, 9 years ago, why I didn't just post these everywhere. And again, too, Instagram wasn't really that popular, but if I'd, had a stronger footprint with my work, you could see that, different companies could find some interest in this. Taking that idea though of using technology and my love for different things, I was able to then make it into a story. And so here's the storyboards, very loosely, of dance universe. So the basic premise is, these different species are able to communicate just through dance. Moving on, Lovely Land of Laos is a 1 minute short film, which again was regionally based in Laos. So again, coming up with different, researching the different animals and native to Laos and the types of landscaping and types of colors that you typically see in a place like Laos was really useful to have these mood boards and then again sent to the students so they had an idea because they'd never been to Laos what's it like there, as well as the general theme of it being similar to kind of like Candyland in terms of the story itself. And here's the final characters. Again, these super large-headed characters. And I'll just show the brief intro of it. Again, this is only 50 minutes or 50-second, 1 minute short film. So you can see the Candyland reference there. The animals of Laos. Okay, so again, your project doesn't have to be that long to be effective, but there is text in it, and again, it's meant, even though it comes off as being really cute, there is a strong message with the text at the end. Here's the team. Again, the film wasn't done yet, but there's all these moments of reward. This is really important to keep everyone engaged when you're directing and keeping it more human. I would have meetings with them individually, so you have quite these intimate moments. And I think there's a lot of respect that comes from these moments that are also both a learning opportunity for them, but also still being playful and keeping things positive, regardless of the outcome of their work. A couple other projects, I do a lot of workshops, and this is a great way to get ideas, and whether it's different characters or different story ideas. And over the number of years, I've been going to Laos and working with students, as well as Thailand, working with students. Well, not just Asia, but these are just images from Asia and some of the sketches and presentations of different pitches as well with the students. I mentioned earlier about photogrammetry, and this is a really good example of taking photographs and the amount of detail that can come from it. And this is in a Buddhist temple. I think I've gone over time, so this is the last in terms of what I'm going to talk about in terms of my summary, and I like to show this image of my nephew. So one thing that's really funny about this video, not image, is that, okay, yeah, first I was supposed to babysit him. My mom didn't seem to care, she was cooking. He fell down, but he got up and he stopped crying. So you just got to get up, you know? Don't cry about it. And so in terms of planning, this is really important. You do want to do things that align with your art, so because it doesn't become painful. Whatever pursuits that you may have that you have an interest in, your curiosity, just do it. Talk to as many people as you can with all your ideas, which requires you to have some friends. And again, it's always better to have, as you see in directing, find better than you talent. Always hang out with people smarter than you, as you see in directing. And that way, you know, when you're planning your ideas, you know, you have this group of I guess, like a think tank of people. Brainstorm, write it all down. 10 ideas, only one might be okay. If that one okay is still not there, then write another 10 ideas in a Word document. So again, write a lot. Pre-production will end up taking about 30% of the entire production time. So if you have a 9-month project, then about 3 months is coming up with pre-production. And of that 3 months of pre-production, you probably want to spend half of it just coming up with the idea to make sure, keep questioning it, is this idea good? Animation does take a long time, so again, lock that film in after you finish the animatic. Watch it over and over and over again. See which shot looks good. Let other people watch it. When you let other people watch it, they give you feedback. You're watching it with them. You might see things differently. And this is really important. You just got to watch it over and over and over again. Directing, be kind to everyone. I mentioned that earlier. Treat people whenever you can. See them as human. Smile. Whenever you're working with people, this is super important. Learn how to develop interpersonal skills. Raise and lower your status as you need to. Be human. Have moments of reward, as I mentioned before. And again, it's all about the journey. If you think about it that way, it's a lot more fun. And when you have fun, you will have less stress. You have less stress, your brain will operate optimally, and you won't get tight, and you can explore more this way. I had some other images in terms of like some of the other projects that I'm working on currently. And just to kind of, again, seeing animation art as a sandbox of play and fun, and you can end up with some really, really cool outcomes from it. So if you have any questions, you can let Professor Uni forward them to me, or you can just message me directly. I'm totally okay with that. You can find me on YouTube, Instagram. You can find me on Facebook using any of these credentials. And I hope you enjoyed this. Hopefully you got something out of it, and enjoy the rest of your academic careers. And I do love Seoul, Korea, so let's try to get together next time I'm there. All right. Take care. Thanks. Bye.